Hey everyone. Tonight, we're stepping away from thermostats, electric blankets, and the soft orange flicker of a gas fireplace. We're walking straight into a night so cold it feels personal, like the air itself has decided you don't belong here. Snow is already whipping past your face in hard diagonal sheets, the kind that stings more than it falls. Your first inhale slices down your throat like broken glass. The wind leans into your chest, testing the seams of your coat, almost curious whether you'll turn back. You won't, not yet. You've come to feel what the first waves of American frontier families felt when they realized the continent's winter was not a season, it was a siege. Quick favor before we go any deeper. If this kind of raw history pulls you in, hit the like button and consider subscribing. Only if it's your kind of thing, no pressure. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far the cold reaches. Lights down low, breath slow. Here we go. You push the door open on a world that never learned the word mercy. The snow under your boots doesn't crunch softly, it cracks like thin ice giving way. Each step sounds louder than the last, as if the ground is warning you to reconsider. The storm isn't content to fall, it wants to get inside your clothes, under your skin, behind your eyes. Early travelers described nights exactly like this one, when the wind sounded like a living thing trying to tear the roof off the sky. You pull your scarf higher, the wool is already stiffening with frost. Your fingertips pulse with the first warning throb of real cold. Somewhere ahead through the white blur, you sense the faint outline of a settlement, 5 or 6 cabins at most, huddled together like animals trying to share warmth they don't actually have. Historical records from the Ohio Valley, the Cumberland Gap, and the Upper Missouri confirm what your body already knows. Winters in the 1780s to 1830s routinely plunged to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 34 degrees Celsius or lower, sometimes for weeks.
One settler on the Illinois frontier in 1830-31 wrote that the ink froze in his pen while he sat 3 feet from the fire. Another in Minnesota Territory measured negative 47 degrees Fahrenheit, that's negative 44 degrees Celsius, in 1835. Indoor water buckets turned to solid blocks overnight. Cattle froze standing up. This wasn't weather. It was a slow, patient predator. A sudden gust slams into you, forcing your eyes half shut. The air smells metallic, almost electric. Your nostrils burn. Somewhere in the dark, iced branches scrape together with a sound like old bones. Then you see it. A single cabin, smaller than a modern garage. Logs chinked with mud that has long since cracked and fallen away. The door hangs crooked on leather hinges, moving slightly, even though no one has touched it. The wind is breathing for it. You're reminded of a detail preserved in dozens of period letters. Many families smeared their faces with bear fat or goose grease before stepping outside in deep cold. The layer acted as a primitive barrier, slowing heat loss and reducing the risk of frostbite on cheeks and noses. One French fur trader wrote that after applying it, his face shone like a greased pig, but he still had his ears when spring came. Desperation breeds ingenuity. Your boots sink to mid-calf now. Each lift feels heavier. You reach the cabin and drag a gloved hand across the nearest log. The wood is iron hard and radiating cold straight through the leather. A split wide enough to admit a bayonet runs from roof to foundation, big enough to whistle when the wind shifts. Scholars still debate whether those first generations were reckless or simply had no reference point. Most came from Virginia Tidewater, the Carolinas, or the British Isles, places where hard winter meant a late frost on the apple blossoms. Nothing in their lived memory prepared them for a climate that could drop 40 degrees in 6 hours and stay there until April.
You rest your forehead against the frozen log for a second, feeling the bite through your hat. Necessity didn't give them the luxury of turning back. Land was freedom, or at least the promise of it. So they stayed, and the cold taught the curriculum. You push the sagging door. The hinges, rawhide strips stiffened by ice, groan like something alive. Inside, the only light is a sickly gray leaking between the logs. The dirt floor is frozen into uneven ridges. Your heel skids, and you catch yourself on the wall. The temperature inside is barely different from outside. Your breath blooms in thick clouds that refuse to rise, hanging at chest height like reluctant ghosts. A thin ribbon of snow still slides under the door, moving across the floor as if it has somewhere to be. You pull the door shut behind you. The latch is nothing more than a carved wooden toggle. It barely catches. For a moment, you stand perfectly still, listening to the cabin settle and the storm argue with itself outside. Your shoulders loosen, but only a fraction. Because you know, and every settler who ever ducked through a doorway like this one knew, that the real fight starts now, keeping the tiny spark of heat inside your body alive until morning. There's no chimney, no stone hearth, not even a proper ring of rocks, just a shallow, fist-sized scoop in the frozen dirt where someone once coaxed a handful of flames to life. You crouch beside it. The gray ash is hard as cement. When you brush it, a few black flakes drift up like dead moths. The last trace of heat fled hours ago, maybe days. You rest your bare knuckles an inch above the surface and feel nothing, except the slow, steady theft of warmth from your own skin. You whisper to yourself, people slept here. Not once. Night after night after night. You try to see it. Bodies curled tight on pine boughs or buffalo robes, spread straight on the iron ground, knees drawn to chests, children tucked between parents like spoons in a drawer, breath freezing on beard stubble and eyelashes. The wind punching the walls so hard the whole cabin flexes. Journals from the 1810s and 1820s repeatedly describe families waking to find a half-inch of snow on their blankets inside the room by morning. A small, hand-sized square has been cut into the far wall to serve as a window. You step over and scrape a circle through the thick frost on the inside of the logs. Outside, the storm has turned the world into a single moving sheet of white. Trees thrash like drowning men. Footprints disappear almost before the boot is lifted. You picture a woman pressing her lips to a child's ear, promising tomorrow will be warmer, even while her words crystallize and fall like salt. Your fingertips trace the gaps between logs. Wind slides through every seam the way water finds every crack in a dam. Some chinking has already fallen out. You can push 2 fingers straight into the night. Maintaining these shelters was a full-time job. One Missouri settler wrote in 1818 that he spent more time patching his cabin walls than farming. Every warm spell softened the clay. Every hard freeze split the logs a little wider. You close your eyes and just listen. The cabin sings in a low, steady moan, half lullaby, half threat. Snow hisses against the bark roof like dry sand poured on tin. Underneath it all is the heartbeat rhythm of people who refuse to die. Patch, stoke, melt snow for water, patch again, pray, sleep with an axe beside the bed in case the roof caves. Your own pulse slows. The terror you carried through the door softens into something closer to reverence. The cold is still absolute, but it no longer feels personal. It's simply the price of being here. You stay another quiet minute, letting the small, brave space hold you the way it once held them. Then you push the door again, A wedge of snow topples inward and spreads across the floor like spilled milk. You step back into the blizzard, collar high, scarf frozen stiff across your mouth, and angle toward the next structure up the slope. This one isn't even a cabin yet, just ribs. Walls rise only to your waist, logs laid green in still bleeding sap that is frozen into amber tears. The roof is a loose quilt of bark slabs and crooked branches. Every gust lifts a corner and slaps it back down. Snow pours straight through the open doorway and out the far side in a perfect white blade. Inside, the storm is the only tenant. A broadaxe lies half buried in frost, its handle wrapped in rags gone stiff as board. 2 wedges and a froe rest on the stump, exactly where frantic hands abandoned them. You can almost hear the moment they fled, the first low growl of thunder in a sky that had been clear an hour earlier, the temperature falling so fast breath turned to needles, the sudden knowledge that unfinished walls are no walls at all.
Historical accounts are full of these half-built homes. During the brutal winter of 1830-31 along the upper Mississippi, surveyors found dozens of claim shanties exactly like this, abandoned mid-construction when early blizzards arrived in October and never left until April. Families who thought they had weeks to finish suddenly had hours. Some dragged their children miles through waist-deep drifts to reach neighbors who at least had 4 walls and a chimney. You stand in the open skeleton and feel the full insult of the wind. There is no corner to hide in, no illusion of shelter. Snow coats your shoulders in seconds. You picture yourself here when the sky first darkened, heart hammering, trying to notch one last log while your fingers refuse to close around the handle. You picture scooping a toddler against your chest, grabbing the one quilt you own, and running for any roof that already had smoke coming out of it. This house will not save anyone tonight.
And yet, come spring, if spring ever comes, someone will return, pry the iced tools out of the ground, and start again. Because that is the other half of the story the storm never quite manages to erase. Most frontier families didn't reach their claim until the sun had already begun sliding south. 6 months on the trace, on the river, on the trace again. Ferries delayed by high water, axles snapping in July mud, children burning with fever in August heat. By the time the wagon creaked to a stop on their 160 acres, the maple leaves were bleeding red, and the first hard frost glittered on the pumpkin vines back in Kentucky. Winter wasn't coming. It was already here. You feel that unforgiving calendar in the wind knifing across your face. The season never waited for walls to reach the eaves. You drop to one knee inside the unfinished shell. The ground is frozen into sharp little ridges. When your fingertips graze it, they flare with pain, as though the earth itself is warning you away.
No amount of buffalo robes or patched quilts could make this spot habitable tonight. Your breath bursts out in heavy, rolling clouds that sink straight to the floor instead of rising. The air is too cold to let them climb. Looking up, you count the gaps between logs, some wide enough to pass a fist through. Every slot is a chimney in reverse, sucking warmth out faster than a body can make it. You remember a passing detail from a traveler's 1809 memorandum. Parties building in late fall would sometimes keep singing, old hymns, river chansons, anything, as they swung the axe and drove the wooden pegs. The effort of singing forced deeper breaths, kept blood moving to the fingers, and, they swore, raised the temperature inside the half-raised walls by a degree or two. Science says vibration alone can't do that, but desperation has its own physics. You stand and step to the edge where the roof should be. Snow lands on your lashes and melts from the heat of your blink.
The whole structure shivers like a colt in a thunderstorm. Yet every notch is cut clean, every corner squared with care. Someone stood right here, beard rimed with ice, telling himself that if he could just get the plate logs on before dark, his wife and babies would have a fighting chance. Hurry is carved deeper than the axe marks. Scholars still trade papers about whether these people were foolishly optimistic or tragically short on daylight. The answer is both, and neither. They knew how to raise a house in settled country. They simply had no idea the continent would withhold the weeks they needed to do it. You back out into the storm. Snowflakes land like hot sparks on any skin still exposed. Chin down, shoulders hunched, you push on across the clearing. Each step punches through crust and plunges to the knee. The ground rises and falls in long, lazy swells, now masked under drifting white. Ahead, a darker shape resolves out of the haze. Another cabin, a little farther along in its berthing.
Walls stand shoulder high on you. The roof is almost complete, except for a ragged fringe where the last bark sheets never got lashed down. Snow funnels of snow pour through those gaps in steady, silvery ropes. You set your numb hand against the door. It resists, swollen with frost. You throw your weight into it. Wood scrapes on wood, and the gap widens just enough for you to slip sideways into the dimness. Inside, the roar drops to a muffled growl. The wind no longer claws your cheeks. It only strokes them with icy fingers through the remaining cracks. The dirt floor has been scraped smoother, almost leveled. In one corner lie half a dozen hand-hewn puncheon planks, someone's future bedstead, measured and split, waiting for the night when we have time. Your shoulders loosen a fraction. After the open skeleton you just left, this feels almost palatial. On a night like this, 4 walls and 3/4 of a roof would have seemed a palace. Yet the cold is still winning. It seeps up through the soles of your boots, radiates from every log, pours down from the open ridge like chilled mercury. You picture the family that will claim this space, backs pressed to the only completed corner, children folded inside adult coats, parents taking turns breathing warm air across small blue fingers while promising, "Just 1 more month and we'll have the chimney finished." You walk the narrow circuit, trailing your glove along the wall. Frost blooms wherever you touch. Snow sifts through the roof gaps and lands in soft, luminous piles that glow faintly in the half-light. You stop, close your eyes, and simply breathe with the room. The storm outside is a wild animal pacing the perimeter, testing every seam. But in here, barely, stubbornly, there is still a pocket of air that belongs to human beings. It isn't much. It is everything. You stand in the half-light and let the truth settle. For thousands of families, this was the real frontier. Not the broad fields they would plow next spring, but this narrow, shaking box while winter hammered the roof like it wanted in. The storm outside is no longer just weather. It has weight, intention, appetite. You feel it in your slowing heartbeat, in the way your lungs hesitate before pulling in another knife-cold breath. You leave the half-walled cabin behind and step back into the blizzard's open mouth. The wind snaps your hood back, then slithers under the collar like it's been waiting for you. Snow has climbed to your waist in places. Every stride is a bargain. You give effort, the storm gives resistance. Old journals called these blizzards white wolves or the long knife because they stalked, circled, and cut without ever showing teeth. Ahead, another cabin squats low,
almost apologetic, half swallowed by a drift that curves against its windward side like a frozen wave, frozen mid-crash. Snow has sealed the door completely, a smooth bluish wall rising clear to the eaves.
You press a glove to it. The surface is dense, wind-polished, and strangely less vicious than the air that's flaying your cheeks. The drift has turned the cabin into a buried seed. You scoop with both hands, clawing until the top of the door frame appears under a crust of ice. When you shoulder the door, it fights back, then gives with a muffled pop, exhaling a lungful of trapped, dead-cold air. You slide through sideways and pull it almost shut behind you. Inside, it's quieter, but not quiet. The whole building trembles whenever the storm lands a heavy punch on the roof. Snow has bulldozed its way over the threshold in a single pale tongue that glitters in the faint light leaking through a knothole. Each footstep cracks like thin ice. A broken stool. A toppled stool. A straw tick dragged into the corner and pounded flat by bodies that slept here in rotating shifts, so someone was always awake to knock snow off the roof before it caved the ridgepole. You can almost hear the whispered countdown. 2 feet, 3 feet, Lord, not much more.
You kneel at the shuttered window. The boards bow inward under tons of drift. When you lay your palm against them, you feel a slow, steady push, as if the storm is leaning its shoulder against the cabin, patient and endless. Diaries from the winter of the deep snow, 1830-31, in Illinois and the Black Hawk War frontier in Wisconsin, describe doors frozen so solid that families chipped ice for hours or climbed out the smoke hole with ropes. One woman wrote that her husband cut a new doorway in the back wall with an axe because the front had vanished entirely for 5 days. Yet here's the quiet irony pressed against your glove. That same mountain of snow is also a blanket. Packed tight, it plugs every chink, turns the wall into something almost insulated. Travelers and naturalists noted it with amazement. Indians had known it for centuries. Snow, the very thing that threatened to bury them alive, sometimes became the only thing, keeping the last degree of warmth from bleeding out into the night.
You stand there, hand still on the drift, feeling the faint warmth your own palm gives back through the leather. The cabin creaks, the wind howls, the snow keeps falling. But in this buried room, something small and stubborn is still negotiating with winter, and for a moment the balance feels almost even. A half-remembered whisper from old campfire tales drifts up. Some families claimed the snow itself chose who would see spring. When drift sealed the door tight and the wind suddenly dropped to a murmur, grandmothers would stroke a child's hair and say, "The winter man is leaning against the house tonight. He only presses on the cabins he means to carry through." It was superstition wrapped in mercy, the only way to turn terror into something almost protective. Modern historians still bicker over how often people were truly snowed in. A few say only the legendary once-in-a-generation storms did it. Others point out that after the third or fourth winter, most diarists stopped bothering to mention it, the way sailors stopped writing, "Wet again today."
The silence in the record probably means it happened so regularly, it became background noise, like hunger or wolves. You stand in the dim, half-buried room and let that argument fade. The walls feel solid under your palm, almost warm compared to the screaming air outside. The drift outside is both prison wall and down comforter. The same snow that could kill you is also the reason the temperature inside hasn't dropped another 10 degrees. It's a bargain no one asked for, but everyone learned to accept. You picture the family that once slept here. 4 or 5 bodies curled like commas on the straw, breathing the same small pocket of air over and over, telling stories in whispers so their voices wouldn't wake the storm. Time to leave. You set your shoulder against the door. It resists, stubborn as a mule. You shove harder. Snow cascades in with a soft hush. You squeeze through the gap, and the wind slaps you wake, stinging every inch of exposed skin. Behind you, the door swings half shut again, sealing the little tomb of stillness you just left. Outside, the world has turned luminous. The clouds are low and glowing, scattering whatever faint daylight leaks through. Drifts roll across the clearing like slow, frozen surf. Every breath you take hangs in front of you for a second, then shreds apart. You start walking again, high-stepping through snow that clutches at your knees. The realization settles in your bones. Snow was never just enemy or friend. It was both, every night, all winter long. It could bury your doorway and your hope in the same hour it saved your life by stopping the wind. You climb a low rise. The storm's voice changes pitch, moaning up the hollows and rattling the iced branches like 1,000 small bones. The sound is older than the trees, older than the trails, older than the idea of ownership scratched onto a land grant. Ahead, through the blowing veil, another shape resolves, smaller than any cabin you've seen so far, more crate than house. A lean-to, maybe, or a traveler's hasty refuge. The door, 2 rough planks on leather hinges, shivers in the wind, half open, as if someone stepped out for firewood and simply never returned. You wade closer. Snow has poured across the threshold and lies in a smooth ramp inside. The air coming out feels motionless, heavy, almost warmer than the gale, the way the inside of a cave feels when you're standing in a blizzard. You step in. The space is barely wider than your outstretched arms. One corner holds a flattened heap of straw, still shaped like a body that lay there a long time. A few rags, once a shirt, maybe a child's dress, are scattered across the dirt. Nothing else. No hearth, no window, no loft. Just 4 low walls, a sagging roof, and the lingering sense that someone curled up here, pulled misery around them like a blanket, and waited for morning that might or might not come. You stand in the middle of that waiting and feel the storm lean against the outside walls, curious, patient, endless. You lower yourself all the way to the straw, slowly, the way someone would who knows the ground is going to bite. The stalks crackle and stab through every layer you're wearing. There is no give, no softness, just a dry, prickling mat that might as well be a fakir's bed of nails made from last summer's grass. This is what bed meant for thousands of first winter families. No corded rope, no ticking, no frame. Just whatever the prairie or the riverbank offered, spread straight on frozen dirt. Court records and land office testimonies from the 1810s, 1840s repeatedly mention households that slept on the floor until the 2nd or even 3rd spring. Lumber went to doors, roof shingles, or a puncheon table first. A raised bedstead was a luxury you earned after you'd survived long enough to deserve it. You stretch out, coat and all. Instantly, the cold climbs your spine like ivy. You pull your knees to your chest the way they must have, small as possible, a living knot trying to keep its own core alive. Breath by breath, you feel the heat you brought in with you, bleeding downward into the ground. The earth is greedy. It never gives back. Near the wall lies a small, burst, homespun sack. A handful of goose and turkey feathers have escaped, stiff as porcupine quills. You pick one up. It crackles between your fingers. Travelers' accounts describe mattresses stuffed with whatever the season provided. Milkweed silk in autumns, dried cattail down, even unraveled rope where nothing better offered. One proud Missouri settler in 1821 wrote home that his family finally slept on the finest feather bed west of St. Louis. A lumpy, rustling bag that held maybe 3 pounds of feathers and a lot of hope. You let your head rest on the straw. Overhead, the roof creaks. Every hard gust shakes loose a faint silver rain of snow that glitters on its way down and melts against the warmth of your cheek. Your breath rises in slow, heavy clouds that hover a moment, then sink again. The air is too cold to hold them up. Through a thumb-wide gap between 2 logs, a needle-thin draft slides across the floor and lifts the loose straw like invisible fingers. You place your bare hand over the crack and feel the cut of it. Sharp, precise, patient. Every settler learned to hunt these drafts the way sailors hunt leaks. Old shirts, moss, clay, corn husks, pages torn from almanacs. Anything to slow the creep of cold along the ground where sleepers lay. A letter from the Sangamon country in Illinois, winter of 1836, describes a mother waking to find the wool blanket white with hoarfrost, 2 inches in from the edge, as though Jack Frost had laid a lace trim while we slept. The moisture of their own breathing had frozen solid during the night. Beautiful and terrible. Against the far wall stands the splintered remains of a crate, someone's future bedstead, abandoned when the nails or time ran out. Many families broke up the wagon that brought them west to gain the boards for a single raised bunk. You can almost hear the conversation. Sleep 6 inches off the ground and lose the ability to leave if the crop failed, or keep the wagon and feel the cold crawl straight into your bones every night. Most chose bones over bondage. You lie still and listen to the small, constant adjustments this room demands of anyone who hopes to wake up in it. Shift the straw an inch to the left when the north wall starts breathing ice. Tuck the youngest between 2 adults so the child becomes the living hot water bottle. Trade sides at midnight so no one's shoulder stays against the ground too long. Historians argue over how often families actually played this nightly game of musical bedding. Some say it was constant, others that only the poorest or unluckiest bothered. But every surviving journal agrees on one thing. The floor was always the final opponent, and it never tired, and it never lost, unless you outlasted it until morning. You draw one more deliberate breath, tasting old grass and older cold, then push yourself up. The straw clings to your coat in sharp, dry needles. Outside, the storm is still hungry. Inside, the little box has done its best. It is not much, but for one more night, it was enough for someone. You stand just inside the doorway and let the door thud shut behind you. The change is so sudden, it almost staggers you. 1 heartbeat ago, you were fighting for every degree of warmth. Now the air feels thick, humid, almost tropical by comparison. Your cheeks burn as blood rushes back into them. The single room is larger than any cabin you've entered tonight, yet every inch is claimed. A waist-high partition of crooked slabs splits the space like a rickety fence. On the human side, 2 low platforms of crates topped with straw and patched quilts, a family's entire estate of comfort. On the animal side, 1 bony milk cow, 2 shaggy goats, and a massive ox whose flanks steam gently in the half-light. Their combined breath rolls upward in slow, heavy clouds that cling to the rafters before leaking out the smoke hole in a thin, reluctant ribbon. The smell is overwhelming at first. Manure, soured milk, wet wool, and the sweet rot stench of trampled hay. But underneath it runs something else, something that loosens the knot in your chest. Raw, undeniable heat. It rises from the big bodies like bread from an oven. This was common enough that period, surveyors barely remarked on it.
yet rare enough that Eastern newspapers treated it as scandalous when they heard. In the severest settlements, Minnesota Territory in the 1820s through 30s, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the Red River Valley, families routinely wintered their stock indoors. A single cow could raise the temperature inside a 16 by 20 cabin by 15 or 20 degrees, sometimes the difference between frostbite and merely misery. One Swedish settler in Wisconsin, 1856, calculated that his ox produced as much heat as a small hearth, burning 2 hours a day, and he didn't have to feed the fire's split wood at 3 in the morning.
You step closer. The cow turns her head, regards you with mild, liquid eyes, then resumes chewing with slow, deliberate patience. The goats shift and bleat softly, more curiosity than alarm. The ox simply exhales, a warm gust that flutters the edge of a hanging blanket on the human side of the partition. You can picture the nightly ritual. Children sent in first to burrow under quilts already preheated by the day's lingering animal heat. Parents banking the single precious fire in the clay and stick hearth, then blowing it out entirely once the beasts began giving off their steady warmth. Sleep came easier with the sound of contented chewing and the knowledge that the cow's great heart was pumping furnace air into the room all night long. You move to the family side and rest a glove on one of the straw-stuffed ticks. It is lumpy, damp, smells strongly of goat, yet it radiates comfort like a promise. A patched wool blanket lies folded at the foot. When you lift it, a puff of trapped warmth rises and brushes your face. Someone slept here last night, maybe an hour ago. The straw still holds the shape of a small body. Overhead, the roof groans under its white load, but the sound is muffled, distant. Inside these walls, the storm feels negotiable for the first time tonight. The animals and humans breathing the same air, sharing the same fragile pocket of survivable temperature. An unspoken pact. We will all keep one another alive until morning. You stand there long enough for the frost to melt from your eyelashes and drip warmly down your cheeks. The ox snorts once more, a low, rolling thunder that vibrates through the plank floor and into your boots. Outside, the blizzard still rages, hungry and endless. In here, life has drawn a circle around itself and dared the winter to break it. You take one more slow, deliberate breath of the thick, living warmth, then turn toward the door. There are more cabins ahead, more stories the storm hasn't finished telling. But you carry this one with you now. The night the frontier learned to sleep pressed flank to flank with the beasts that fed them, banking on shared heartbeat and shared breath to outlast the cold. You rest your forearm along the top rail of the partition and let the heat roll off the ox's broad back into your sleeve. The great beast shifts his weight. The boards beneath your boots creak, and a fresh wave of warmth rises like steam from a kettle. Frost still clings in stiff curls around his neck and shoulders, evidence of the world he was dragged in from. But the rest of him glows, pink skin under coarse hair, exhaling slow, deliberate clouds that taste of sweet hay and summer pastures locked away until spring. This was never elegance. It was engineering born of desperation and brilliant in its simplicity. Moravian missionaries in the 1790s, Norwegian homesteaders in the 1860s, French-Canadian voyageurs all the way back to the 1600s. When the mercury vanished from the bottom of the thermometer, they moved the livestock inside. A single mature cow, breathing and digesting through the long night, could throw off as much steady heat as a fireplace burning 4 armloads of oak. Many families simply could not spare that much wood. Some had no chimney yet at all, So the partition went up, sometimes nothing more than a row of barrels or a rope strung with blankets, and everyone agreed to share the same breathing air until April. You cross to the human side and kneel beside the smallest sleeping pallet, pushed right up against the dividers so a child could lie with one cheek to the boards and feel the slow pulse of animal warmth on the other side. The blanket is heavy, hand-woven wool still carrying its natural lanolin. It smells of sheep and smoke and countless nights pressed against frightened hearts. You lift a corner and the fibers release a faint puff of trapped heat that drifts across your face like a sigh. A tender detail surfaces from old Norwegian settler letters. Parents claimed their children slept deeper when the cow was breathing on the other side of the wall. The slow, tidal rhythm. Inhale 4 seconds, exhale 4 seconds, pause, repeat. Worked better than any lullaby. Modern sleep studies quietly confirm what those mothers knew by instinct. The low-frequency resonance of a large ruminant is remarkably close to the pink noise that lulls human brains into delta waves. At the tiny window, you trace a finger through the frost feathers. The glass, if there ever was glass, is long gone. A scrap of oiled rawhide has been stretched across the opening instead. It rattles like a drum with every gust. Through it, you glimpse the storm's white fury, then turn back to the room where lantern light glimmers on wet animal eyes and the slow rise and fall of ribs. The contrast is almost dizzying. Outside, a world sharp enough to kill. Inside, a humid, breathing ark riding the flood of winter. Historians still debate how ordinary this was. Some insist it happened only in the most godforsaken corners of settlement. Others unearth tax rolls and stable inventories showing dozens of households officially listing one cow wintering in-house. The truth, as usual, lived in the middle. It was common wherever firewood was dear, chimneys unfinished, and children too small to lose.
You drift back to the folded stack of blankets, lift the top one, and give it a gentle shake. Dust and tiny flecks of straw spiral up, catching the lantern light like slow-motion fireflies. You picture a mother smoothing this same blanket over shoulders already shivering, whispering, "Just listen to old Bess breathing. She'll keep us warm till morning." A hard gust slams the cabin. The roof answers with a deep, woody groan. Snow sifts through a half-patched seam overhead and falls in a glittering curtain that melts the instant it touches your sleeve. You tilt your face up to it, let a few flakes settle on your lips, then brush them away. One last lungful of the thick, living air, wool, manure, hay, hope, and you turn toward the door. Your boots leave dark, wet prints across the straw-strewn floor, temporary signatures soon to be trampled by hooves and bare feet again tonight. You pull the door open only wide enough to slip through. The storm rushes in to greet you, furious at having been kept out this long. Behind you, the latch clicks shut, and the faint ribbon of smoke keeps rising, wavering but unbroken, a quiet promise against the dark. You step back into the blizzard, carrying the warmth on your skin like a secret, proof that on the very worst nights the frontier ever threw at them, people and beasts learn to breathe as one creature, large and stubborn and alive. You step out of the animal-warmed cabin, carrying a pocket of heat against your ribs the way someone might carry a live coal wrapped in wool. The storm punishes you for it immediately. Wind knifes under your collar, snowflakes strike your cheeks like thrown grit, and the warmth you stole begins to leak away with every heartbeat. You pull your coat tighter and trudge on, wishing you could fold the memory of that ox's breath around your shoulders like an extra cloak. The next cabin sits a little lower in the clearing, its roof bowed under a thick white thatching. Ice has welded the door shut in a glassy seam.
You brace your shoulder and heave.
The seal snaps with a sound like breaking bone, and the door swings inward on protesting leather hinges. Inside, the air is still and dead cold. No lantern, no hearth, no living furnace of beasts. Only the sharp smell of frozen wood and the faint metallic bite of extreme low temperature. Broken chairs lean together like drunks. In the corner, someone has built a careful nest entirely out of clothing. You kneel. The pile is deliberate. 3 heavy wool coats spread flat as a foundation, then shirts, trousers, petticoats, and skirts layered like shingles of fabric until the mound is thick enough to blunt the floor's bite. On top lie 2 buffalo robes turned hair side in, frozen stiff as sheet iron. Everything is white-rimmed with hoarfrost. You lift one of the greatcoats. It weighs as much as a child, and the wool is coarse enough to scour skin. When you shake it, the frost falls in a soft shower that glitters once in the dim light, then vanishes against the boards.
This is what people wore to bed. Every stitch they owned from skin out. Stockings stayed on feet, mittens stayed on hands. Scarves were wound so tight only eyes and nose showed. One 1832 letter from the Des Moines River country describes a mother finding her toddler's eyelashes frozen together in the morning because the child had fallen asleep with only a narrow breathing hole in her wrappings. You lower yourself onto the clothing mound. It gives unevenly, a button here, a thick collar there, the ridge of a belt buckle pressing into your thigh. It is clumsy and lumpy, yet unmistakably better than bare boards. The layers trap the small heat your body still carries from the last cabin. You can almost feel how exhaustion would finish the job. The weight of all that wool pressing down like a firm hand saying, stay still, conserve, breathe shallow, and you might wake up again. A curious note surfaces from old Midwestern folklore. Some claimed that sleeping under the full press of every garment in the house produced a heaviness that invited the long, sweet sleep.
They said dreams came slower, deeper, more vivid, as though the body cocooned itself against the killing cold, and the mind, grateful for any mercy, slipped into a trance that lasted until the first gray light. Science would later call it mild hypothermia-induced narcosis, but to them it was a gift, winter's only lullaby. Along the wall, a row of pegs still holds the family's outer armor. Coats hanging open like empty bodies, sleeves outstretched and stiff. You touch one. The fabric crackles, and the arm stays bent exactly as the last wearer left it, perhaps hurrying out at dawn to break ice on the water bucket or check traps before feeling returned to fingers. You sit a moment longer, letting the cold settle and the silence deepen. The storm prowls the roof, but in here, the only sound is the soft creak of frozen cloth whenever you shift your weight. Then you stand, brush the frost from your knees, and step back into the blizzard. The door groans shut behind you, sealing the little clothing fortress exactly as you found it, waiting for bodies that may never return, yet perfectly ready if they do. The wind hits like a slap, but the memory of that heavy wool nest travels with you now, another quiet lesson in how people turned the very tools of survival into the only bed they had. You lean into the wind, head down, each step a small negotiation with snow that wants to keep your boots. The cold has worked its way through every seam now. The memory of animal heat and heavy wool feels like something you dreamed in another life. Your breath streams out in thick banners that freeze almost before they vanish. Ahead, a darker bulk rises out of the blur, larger than any cabin you've entered this night. Longer, lower, half swallowed by a drift that curves over the roof like a breaking wave. One corner of the structure is already buried, only the ridgepole and a crooked chimney stub poke above the white. You struggle through the last waist-deep stretch and reach the wall. Logs here are massive, whole cottonwood trunks barely squared, chinked with clay that has cracked and fallen away in fist-sized chunks. You run a glove along the wood and feel the deep scars of the broad axe. Someone felled and shaped these giants with nothing but muscle and time. The door is heavier than any you've met tonight, bound with rawhide instead of iron. It fights you, then gives all at once. You stumble inside and pull it shut against the wind until the latch clicks. The space opens around you. One long, dim room, almost a hall. No lantern, no animals, no clothing nest. Just a single enormous hearth built of riverstone at the far end, black with old soot and cold as graveyard iron. Above it, a crude crane still hangs, a kettle-shaped shadow frozen mid-swing. But what stops your breath is the sleeping arrangement. Along both side walls, rough bunk frames have been built right into the logs, too high, like the berths of a ship. Each bunk is wide enough for 2 or 3 bodies and lined with pine boughs gone silver with age. Over the boughs lie buffalo robes, bear skins, patched quilts, and what looks like an entire elk hide still carrying its coarse winter hair. The lower bunks are only a foot off the floor. The upper ones require a notched log ladder. Everything is arranged with military precision, as though an entire extended family once slept here in ordered rows, smallest children on the inside wall, adults on the cold outer edge. You step closer. The air is still frigid, but not the killing, bone-deep cold of the smaller cabins. The sheer mass of the logs and the packed snow insulating the outside walls have turned this house into something closer to a cave that once held fire. You climb the short ladder to an upper bunk and lie back. The pine needles crackle softly, the hide smell of smoke, musk, and long-gone summers on the plains. From this height you can see the whole room's full length, 12 bunks, maybe 14. Enough for parents, children, grandparents, maybe a hired hand or a passing traveler granted shelter. Everyone breathing the same air, sharing the same slow drift of warmth rising from the dying coals someone would have banked before climbing the ladder. A detail you've read in diaries clicks into place. These long, double-tiered stockade or fort cabins were common in the earliest years of a settlement, when neighbors were miles apart and blizzards could last a week. Families sometimes slept 20 to a room, head to toe like cordwood, because body heat was the one resource no storm could steal. One 1818 traveler on the Missouri described waking in such a bunkhouse to find his beard frozen to the buffalo robe and the breath of the man beside him crystallized on his own cheek. Yet no one had lost fingers or toes that night. You let your arm dangle over the edge of the bunk. Your glove brushes the log wall. It is cold but not icy. Somewhere deep in the stones of the hearth, a faint memory of heat still sleeps. You can almost hear it, the shuffle of many bodies settling, the creak of green wood in the fire, a low murmur of voices trading stories or prayers until exhaustion won. Outside, the same storm that howls tonight would have prowled these very walls, testing every chink, while inside the long room slowly filled with the steady collective warmth of human beings refusing to die separately. You stay long enough for your pulse to slow to the rhythm of that must have rocked this house on 1,000 winter nights. Then you climb down, boots thudding softly on the packed earthen floor. At the hearth you crouch and lay a bare hand on the stones. They are colder than a grave, yet you can still feel the ghost of every fire that ever burned here. The heat that once rose in waves to keep frost from the faces of sleeping children. You stand, draw one last breath of the heavy, smoke-tinted air, and walk to the door. When you open it, the storm rushes in again, furious at having been kept out of this house too. You step through the gap and pull the heavy door shut behind you. The blizzard swallows you instantly, but something new travels with you now. The knowledge that on the very longest, coldest nights, people once packed themselves together like matches in a box, struck one small spark of shared warmth, and kept it burning until morning. The snow keeps falling. The next shadow is already waiting ahead. You kneel in the near dark and let the tiny heartbeat of the embers draw you in. The glow is no bigger than a cupped hand, yet it feels louder than the storm outside. A stubborn, living thing refusing to surrender. The clay bowl is ancient-looking, its rim blackened and chipped by countless nights just like this. A few finger-thin splinters lie scattered around it like broken bones. You pick one up. It is so dry it almost crackles in your glove. Someone sat right where you are now, snapping kindling by feel in the dark so the noise wouldn't wake the children, feeding the coals one precious twig at a time. Frontier journals are full of these night lamps. When the wind howled too hard to keep a full fire, or when every stick of wood had to be counted like coins, families nursed a handful of embers the way sailors nursed the last fresh water. A shard of pottery or a broken plate became a lid to trap heat. A scrap of bark served as a bellows. One 1834 account from the Sangamon Valley tells of a woman who kept the same 3 coals alive for 9 straight days during the Great Snow, moving them from bowl to bowl when the first cracked, whispering to them the way another person might whisper to a sick child. You ease a curl of birch bark from the little fire start box and lay it gently across the glow. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the edge blackens, curls, and a needle-thin flame licks upward. The temperature in the room doesn't change much, but the darkness retreats an inch, and your lungs loosen as though someone just opened a window you didn't know was there. You settle back against the post. Cold climbs your spine from the frozen dirt floor, but the ember light paints soft orange across your knees, and for the first time tonight, that is enough. You can almost hear the quiet rituals, the soft puff of breath when someone leaned close to coax the glow brighter, the rustle of a blanket as another sleeper stirred and asked in a hush, "Still with us?" And the murmured answer, "Still with us." Scholars still argue over how universal the practice was. Some insist only the poorest or most isolated bothered. Others point out that every attic and museum from here to the Dakotas seems to hold at least one soot-blackened ember bowl. The truth probably shifted house to house and winter to winter. Some nights you could afford a roaring fire, some nights you could not. And on the very worst nights, you learned to speak softly to a handful of red eyes in a clay dish and trust them to keep you alive until morning. You watch the tiny flame you fed climb the bark curl, flare once, then sink back into patient coals. The glow, steady pulse of it matches your own heartbeat now. Outside, the storm prowls and claws at the logs, but in here the small red heart keeps its vigil. You stay long enough to feel the difference between freezing and merely cold. Long enough to understand why someone might have whispered, "Good boy," or "Stay with me," to a bowl of embers the way another person speaks to a faithful dog. Eventually you rise. The glow dims behind you as you move to the door, but you carry its memory like a coal tucked inside your coat. Small, almost weightless, yet enough to start the next fire when the time comes. You push the door open, the storm lunges in, hungry again. You step through, the glow and let the darkness swallow the little room once more, trusting the embers to keep their ancient promise until someone else, or morning itself, comes to relieve them. The snow is deeper now, the night blacker, but you walk on carrying that faint red heartbeat against your ribs, proof that even the smallest light, carefully tended, can outlast the longest winter night. You ease the door shut, and the storm's roar drops to a dull, distant thud. The room is so narrow, your outstretched arms could almost touch both walls. It feels less like a cabin and more like a wooden womb, built to hold exactly what it was meant to hold. 3 human beings refusing to let the night take them. They lie in a tight row on the packed earth floor, outlined under a single mountainous quilt that rises and falls almost imperceptibly, as though the blankets themselves are breathing. You kneel. The heat rising from the mound is faint but unmistakable, the last ghost of bodies that once pressed together here, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, breath mingling in the small space between faces. There is no mattress, no straw tick, only a folded wagon canvas for a ground cloth, and then layer upon layer of patched fabric. A man's worn frock coat turned inside out, a child's outgrown dress, burlap feed sacks bleached and softened by 100 washings, pieces of blanket too ragged for anything but this final duty.
Every scrap has been stitched and restitched, turned and reused until the original color is only a memory. The weight of it all is astonishing. You lift one corner, and your arm sinks as though you've taken hold of a sandbag. This was called spooning for life in the old letters. Personal space was a luxury. Survival demanded contact. Travelers caught by sudden blizzards wrote of waking in strange cabins, pressed against strangers, cheek to beard or braid. Everyone understanding without words that an inch of separation could mean frost-bitten toes by morning. One Michigan settler in 1837 described a night when 12 people, family, neighbors, 2 passing fur traders, slept in a 14 by 16 cabin like sardines in a tin. Yet every soul walked out alive when the sun finally showed itself 4 days later. You let the corner fall back into place. The quilt settles with a soft papery sigh, as though relieved to keep guarding its secret.
In the half-light, you can make out the faint outline of faces that aren't there. A father on the cold outer edge, taking the worst of the wall's chill on his back. A mother curved around a child in the middle, perhaps another child tucked against her chest, small boots still on because boots that would be shared with a sibling at dawn, so no one walked barefoot to the woodpile. The air itself feels thick with their absence, warm breath that lingered long after the bodies left, heat that pooled under the quilts and rose slowly toward the low rafters. You lay your bare hand just above the fabric and feel the warmth kisses your palm, fragile, precious, earned. For a moment, you almost lie down in the empty space they left. There is room for one more if you curl tight, just to feel what it was like to be the fourth corner of that stubborn human square. Instead, you simply rest your forehead against the edge of the quilt mound and breathe with them, slow and deliberate, the way they must have done when the wind screamed loudest. Outside, the storm keeps its vigil. In here, 3 bundled shapes and 1 impossible quilt once turned a killing night into just another night that ended in morning. You rise quietly, careful not to disturb ghosts that aren't yours to wake, and back toward the door. When you open it, the wind tries to shove you backward, but you slip through and pull it shut with both hands, sealing the small, fierce warmth inside once more. The blizzard swallows you again, yet you walk lighter now, carrying the shape of that shared bed against your ribs,
like a second heart, proof that on the very coldest nights, people simply became one larger animal, wrapped itself in everything it owned, and dared the winter to try harder. The snow keeps falling. Somewhere ahead, another cabin is waiting to teach you what comes next.
You lean into the gale, head down, the image of that single living quilt still pressed against the inside of your eyelids. 3 bodies, maybe 4, maybe 6 on the worst nights, stitched together by nothing more than breath and necessity, forming one stubborn creature that refused to let the cold win. The wind tries to peel the memory away, but it clings like frost. Each step is heavier than the last. Snow has climbed above your knees. Every lift and plunge sends a shock of cold up your legs. The world has narrowed to the small circle of white your eyes can still make out, and the steady, aching rhythm of moving forward. Then the next cabin appears, low and stubborn, half dug into the side of a gentle rise, as if the settlers tried to burrow into the earth itself for protection. The roof is not shingled, but thatched with prairie grass and sod, now buried under a thick white cap. A thin, almost invisible wisp of smoke rises from a clay and stick chimney no wider than your arm, fighting its way upward before the wind slaps it flat.
You reach the door, really just a quilt hung over a low opening, and push the heavy fabric aside. Warmth hits you like a physical blow. The space is tiny, scarcely 10 feet across. The ceiling so low you have to stoop. The floor has been dug down a foot below ground level. The walls rise from there like the sides of a root cellar. In the center, directly under the smoke hole, a small flames lick around 3 wrist-thick logs arranged in a star. The fire is modest, almost polite, yet it has turned the little den into something just this side of habitable. And the sleeping arrangement is unlike anything you've seen tonight. The entire floor, except for a narrow walkway around the fire, is one continuous raised platform of earth and logs, packed hard and covered with pine boughs, then a thick layer of buffalo robes fur side up. The robes overlap like shingles, creating a single, seamless bed that fills the room wall to wall.
There is no where one person ends and another begins. The whole space is designed for a family to lie down together as one organism, feet toward the fire, heads against the back wall, the outermost adult taking the coldest edge the way a whale takes the waves for the pod. You step out of your boots and onto the platform. The buffalo hair is still warm. Someone was here not long ago. The heat rises gently through the thick fur and into the soles of your stockinged feet. You lower yourself and lie back. The ceiling is close enough that you could touch it with your knuckles. Smoke drifts lazily upward, carrying the scent of pine resin and roasted earth. This is a half-faced camp or dugout bunkhouse raised to its final form. Part soddy, part earth lodge, part desperate ingenuity. Plains and prairie settlers used the design when timber was scarce. The earth itself became insulation, wall, and mattress all at once. A good one, banked with snow, could stay above freezing inside, even when the world outside fell to -30. You stretch out full length. The robes mold to your body. The packed earth beneath holds the day's heat like a slow oven. Above you, sparks ride the smoke column and disappear through the hole into the night. You can almost feel the invisible weight of bodies would have added. Children tucked between parents, grandparents on the warmer inner curve, maybe a dog curled against someone's legs, every heartbeat contributing to the common pool of warmth. A fragment from an 1840s homestead claim journal surfaces. We sleep all in a row like loaves in a pan, and when the wind howls worst, we are warmest, for we are one long loaf together. You lie there long enough for the fire's small crackle to become the only sound in the world, long enough for the buffalo hair to thaw the ice in your coat sleeves, long enough to understand why some families never bothered building separate beds even when spring came. Why waste lumber when the earth itself would cradle you if you asked it right?
At last you sit up, reluctant, and pull your boots back on. The robes sigh as they lose your shape. You step down into the narrow walkway, feed the fire one cautious stick so it will still be alive for the next traveler, and duck back through the quilt doorway. The storm greets you with a roar, astonished that anything warm dared step outside again. But you carry the dugout's heat with you now, banked under your ribs the same way the earth banks fire. Low, steady, almost secret, ready to keep one more body alive until morning. The snow keeps falling, deeper, whiter, endless. Somewhere ahead, another shelter waits, holding whatever final lesson the frontier winter still has left to teach. You lower your head and walk on, carrying every shared bed, every coal, every breath you borrowed tonight, proof that people once learned to become their own hearth when the world forgot how to be kind. You kneel in the hush and let the quilt mountain draw you in like a slow tide.
The topmost cover is a faded log cabin pattern, squares of indigo and turkey red, now softened to dusk and rose. Beneath it waits a second quilt, then a third, then a fourth, each heavier than the last, until the stack feels less like bedding and more like a deliberate act of burial in reverse. You press your palm into the center, and the layers sink, exhale, and close again, reluctant to give up whatever heat they still guard. This is a burrow bed, a winter womb. Frontier families in the northern prairies and lake states perfected them. Straw heaped thick on the floorboards, then blankets, robes, coats, grain sacks, anything that could be spared, piled so deep that a person disappeared completely, leaving only a breathing hole the size of a teacup. One 1849 Michigan diary records a mother boasting that her 3 children could vanish so thoroughly under the quilts at night that she finds them in the morning only by following the warm spot with her hand. You lift the corner and the scent rises. Wool washed and wood ash lie, smoke, the ghost of summer sun on line-dried cotton, and yes, something greener, crushed sage or sweet clover, tucked between the middle layers the way later generations tucked lavender sachets in drawers. A small fierce kindness against the long months when nothing green lived outside. You slide your arm deeper, all the way to the elbow. The heat is astonishing, not hot, but alive, the way the inside of a loaf is alive 5 minutes out of the oven. The straw underneath crackles softly, releasing a papery breath that smells of last year's meadow. You understand instantly why children begged to sleep in the hole. Once the quilt settled, the weight pressed you into a pocket where your own warmth could not escape. The darkness was absolute, the storm reduced to a muffled heartbeat against the roof, and the only world left was the slow rise and fall of the blankets above your face.
A Norwegian settler on the Minnesota prairie in 1863 wrote that on the worst nights she and her husband slept with their 4 children in one such burrow, the youngest in the very center, like the pit in a peach, and when they woke in the morning, the quilts were stiff with frost on top, yet the inside of their nest was almost too warm to leave. You lie down on the very edge of the mound, cheek against a patch that might once have been a flour sack, and let the layers settle over your shoulder. The weight is immediate and astonishing,
like being held by a patient, enormous animal. Your breath comes back to you warm against your own lips. For 30 seconds, the storm forgets your name. Scholars still debate how common the full burrow bed really was. Some say it was universal wherever firewood was short and chimneys smoked or froze. Others insist most families managed with ordinary quilts and a trundle bed. Both can be right. In a mild winter, you slept like a civilized person. In a hard one, you became a seed planted deep under fabric and straw and trusted spring to find you out. You stay long enough for the cold in your coat to begin retreating. Long enough for the faint herbal breath of the quilts to settle in your lungs like a promise. Then you push yourself up reluctantly and smooth the layers back into place. The mound sighs, accepting your absence the way good earth accepts a seed. At the door you pause, hand on the latch, and look back. In the dimness, the quilts looked less like bedding and more like a low hill someone might mistake for ordinary ground, until they pressed a palm to it and felt the stubborn warmth still sleeping underneath. You step outside. The storm lunges, delighted to have you back. Snow seals the doorway almost before you pull it shut, as though the cabin itself wants to keep its secret burrow undisturbed.
But you carry its lesson with you now. On the very longest nights, people learned to disappear completely, to become nothing but breath and heartbeat under a mountain of cloth, trusting their own small heat to hold the winter at bay until the pale edge of morning finally crept across the topmost quilt. The wind howls harder, sensing it has almost won. You lower your head, smile against the sting of flakes, and keep walking. There is still one more shelter ahead, and the night is far from finished teaching you how warmth was once invented. Night after night, body after body, quilt after quilt, in a land that never promised to be kind. You cradle the stone a moment longer, letting its quiet heat soak through the leather of your gloves and into the small bones of your hands. It is heavier than it looks, dense, patient, ancient, the kind of weight that feels like borrowed time. River stones were currency in a winter cabin. Children were sent to the creek in late autumn with gunny sacks, told to choose only the roundest, smoothest ones, no sharp edges, no hidden cracks. A good stone, heated cherry red in the evening fire, and then double wrapped in wool or deer hide, could hold useful warmth for 6 or 7 hours. More than one diary records a mother slipping a wrapped stone between her children's feet at bedtime, then retrieving the same stone, still lukewarm, to warm her own hands while she started breakfast at 4 a.m. You set it down exactly where you found it, nestled in its little nest of patched flannel, and noticed 2 more stones nearby, cooler now but still warmer than the surrounding air. A triangle of heat, placed so feet or hips or a small back could rest against them through the long night. The bed itself is simple: straw over boards, 2 buffalo robes, 1 quilt. Nothing like the towering burrow you just left, yet the stones turn it into something cleverer, an oven built for human loaves. You can picture the ritual: fire banked low, stones rolled out with a green stick, wrapped quickly before their glow faded, carried like precious eggs to the waiting bed. Then the family sliding in, arranging themselves around the warm islands the way boats anchor near a lighthouse. A German settler on the Missouri in 1839 wrote that on the coldest nights his wife kept 4 stones going at once, one at the children's feet, one at theirs, and 2 more laid on the hearth to be swapped in at midnight when the first pair cooled. He claimed the stones made winter bearable and marriage sweeter, because no one had to fight over who got the warmest spot. The stones simply moved to whoever needed them most. You press your bare palm to the nearest robe. The heat is faint now, but unmistakable, like a memory of a fire that burned hours ago, still refusing to leave. You imagine a child curling around this very stone, the way you once curled around a hot water bottle, cheek against warm flannel, breathing in the faint smell of wood smoke trapped in the weave.
Scholars still find these wrapped stones cached under floorboards or lined up along cabin walls like silent sentinels. Some argue they were everyday tools. Others say only the poorest families bothered once they had a proper hearth. Both are right, depending on the year, the wood supply, the ferocity of the storm outside. You stand, brush a few crumbs of frost from your knees, and step back toward the door. Before you leave, you nudge the warmest stone a fraction closer to the center of the bed, an old habit you didn't know you had, making sure the next person who lies here will find it exactly where a cold body needs it most. Outside, the storm has redoubled its efforts, driving snow sideways, erasing your tracks almost before they form. But the stone's heat stays with you, a small, smooth weight against your ribs, proof that people once learned to bottle fire itself, wrap it in rags, and tuck it into bed beside them like a faithful dog. The night is growing thinner now. The sky behind the clouds has begun to pale at the edges, but there is still one more cabin waiting. One final way people stole warmth from a world determined to take it back. You pull your collar high, lean into the wind, and keep walking, carrying every borrowed degree you've gathered tonight like embers in your pockets, ready for whatever the frontier winter still has left to say. You linger at the threshold, one hand on the latch, the other still holding the ghost heat of the stone against your palm. The cabin feels like a heart that has learned to beat very slowly so it can keep going all winter. Every detail tells the same quiet story. Nothing here is wasted, nothing is accidental. The small stack of kindling is split no thicker than your wrist, easy to light, quick to burn, just enough to heat the stones again tomorrow. The basket of scorched wrapping sits within arm's reach of the bed. No one wants to cross a freezing floor in bare feet at 2 a.m. to fetch cloth. Even the placement of the stones is deliberate. One pair near where adult feet would go, one pair higher up for a child's back or a pregnant belly, one spare kept on the hearth edge so it could be swapped in without ever letting the fire die completely. You picture the nightly choreography, the careful rolling of the glowing stones out of the ashes with a green stick, the quick double wrap in singed flannel, the soft grunt as someone carried the hot bundle to the bed and slid it under the quilt like contraband sunlight, the sigh that always escaped when cold toes finally met that steady, stored warmth. A Swedish settler in Iowa, 1854, wrote that her youngest called the stones night sheep because they lay quietly at the foot of the bed and kept everyone from wandering too far into the cold in their sleep. Another family in the Dakota Territory claimed they could tell how hard the winter would be by how many stones they had to be heated each evening. 3 was ordinary, 5 was serious, 7 meant pray. You step back to the bed one last time and press your bare hand to the blanket directly above the warmest stone. The heat rises through straw and wool like a slow tide, steady, patient, utterly reliable. It is not dramatic. It will never roar or crackle, but it will still be here when the fire is only ash, when the wind has stolen every spark from the chimney, when even the memory of summer feels like a lie. This is what the stones taught. Fire is beautiful, but stored fire is love. You finally open the door.
The storm barrels in, eager to reclaim the space, but for a heartbeat the cabin resists. The stones holding their ground, the blankets keeping their shape, the whole small room breathing out one last lungful of earned warmth against the night. You pull the door shut and stand in the blizzard again. Snow instantly erases your footprints, but the heat stays cupped in your palms like a secret you are now sworn to carry.
The sky has begun to pale at its eastern edge, a cold iron gray rather than black. Dawn is still hours away, yet something in the air has shifted. The storm is tiring. There is only one more cabin visible now, a low, dark shape almost lost against the whitening world, its doorway facing away from the wind, as though it already knows the final trick people used when every other warmth had been taken from them. You lower your head, draw the memory of river stones close around your heart, and start walking. The frontier winter is almost finished speaking. You want to hear the last word. You settle onto the low stool and let the ember glow paint soft orange across your wrists. The warmth is fragile, almost shy, yet it reaches straight into the marrow the storm has been trying to freeze all night. The clay pot above the coals is small, barely big enough for 4 cups, its sides ringed with the pale ghosts of 1,000 boilings. The handle is wrapped in a twist of homespun, gone shiny from years of use.
You lift it carefully. A faint slosh tells you a finger's depth of water still sleeps at the bottom, too precious to pour out, ready for the next mouth that needs warming from the inside. This was the last line of defense when wood ran low and the night ran long. A kettle kept gently simmering, refilled with snow melted in a tin cup, so it never quite emptied. Herbs or bark or nothing at all added for flavor or for hope. People called it storm tea, warming water, or, in the bluntest cabins, hot drink. Anything that turned the core of a body from ice back to human for a little while. A Norwegian woman on the Minnesota frontier in 1862 wrote that her family measured the winter in cups. Every evening the kettle went on, every adult drank 2 cups, every child 1, and if they could, still had water enough for a second round before dawn, they knew they had won another day. She claimed the ritual was half medicine, half prayer.
You lift one of the cups again and breathe in the ghost scent clinging to the rim. Pine needle, sassafras root, a whisper of something almost like mint. Nothing that would impress a city tea shop. Everything that could keep despair from taking root in a child's chest at 3 a.m., when the wind sounded like it would tear the roof off and carry it to Canada. The embers sigh as a draft sneaks through the chinking. You lean forward and shield them with your hands the way you've seen done in every cabin tonight, and the glow brightens just enough to show you the rest of the room. A single low bed built from split logs, blankets thin but many, and in the corner a row of tin cups hanging from pegs like bells waiting for morning. You understand now why the cups are left half full. It is not carelessness, it is strategy. A cold cup can be set directly on the coals and be drinkable again in minutes. Every swallow bought time for blood to reach fingers and toes, for hearts to remember their proper rhythm, for sleep to come without the terror of freezing in it. One traveler in the Wisconsin pinery, 1840s, told of arriving at a cabin where the father greeted him with nothing more than a tin cup of hot water flavored with a single hemlock needle. "Drink," the man said. "It's all we have tonight, but it's warm, and warm is half of alive." You tip the last drops from the cup you hold into your mouth. It is barely lukewarm now, yet it slides down like forgiveness, spreading a small sun behind your ribs. Outside, the storm is tiring. The wind has lost its sharpest edge, the snow falling straighter, almost gentle. Dawn is gathering itself somewhere beyond the clouds. You set the cup back on the table exactly as you found it, handle turned the same direction, ready for the next pair of cold hands. Then you stand, stretch life back into legs gone stiff, and walk to the door. Before you leave, you pause, listening. In the hush between gusts, you can almost hear the soft clink of cups being filled, the quiet murmur of voices trading the same 4 words every frontier family knew by heart. Drink it while it's hot. You step outside. The air feels different, still cold enough to burn the lungs, but no longer murderous. The sky has shifted to the color of wet iron. The longest night is finally loosening its grip. Behind you, the cabin settles, embers keeping their small red watch, kettle waiting, cups patient on the table. You pull your coat close, smile against the wind that has become merely weather instead of executioner, and start the slow walk back through the drifts. The storm has told you everything it knows. How people became quilts, became stones, became animals, became embers, became cups of hot water when there was nothing else left. How they turned their own bodies into the only hearth the winter could not put out. Morning is coming. You carry its first faint promise, and every borrowed degree of warmth you gathered tonight, back into the white world that is already beginning to soften around the edges. The frontier winter has spoken its last word, and the word is, we were warm enough. You sink your fingers deeper into the nest of hides and feel the warmth rise up like a slow breath. This is the final shelter, the deepest trick the frontier ever learned. When wood failed, when quilts weren't enough, when even the river stones had given up their last degree, people turned to the animals they had taken from the land and asked them, one last time, to give back heat. The nest is built the way a wild creature would build it. Thick, coarse deer hides on the bottom to blunt the frozen floor, softer doeskin next, then fox, rabbit, and in the very center, the luxurious black inner fur of a winter-taken bear turned hair-side in. The outermost layer is heavy bear skin, claws removed, head still attached in one case, turned so the thick ruff forms a natural windbreak for the sleeper's face. Every hide overlaps its neighbor by half, creating a single, seamless envelope that traps air the way a bird's feathers trap it. You press your cheek to the bare fur. It is still, miraculously, body warm. Someone curled here not long ago, maybe minutes, maybe hours, and the nest has not yet forgotten them. This was called going to ground, or sleeping in the robes. Families who lived by hunting, and often from trapping, would spend entire winters in such beds, emerging only to check lines or melt snow for water. One French-Canadian voyageur, wintering on the upper Missouri in 1805, wrote that he and his partner slept inside a single buffalo robe lined with wolf, so warm that we woke sweating while the water bucket beside us was solid ice. A Plains Métis woman in the 1870s told a missionary that her children never knew what it was to be cold at night until they moved into a frame house with only blankets like white people.
You ease yourself down into the nest. The hides sigh and shift and close around you like a living thing. Instantly, the storm's voice drops to a muffled thud, as if someone has pulled the whole world away and left you floating in a pocket of perfect stillness. The smell is strong, tanned leather, wood smoke, wild musk, yet it feels like the safest scent in existence.
your breath comes back warm against your own face. The cold that has ridden your bones all night loosens its grip and slides away, ashamed. You understand now why some families, even after they could afford feather beds and iron stoves, kept one robe nest in the corner for the old hard winters that might come again. It wasn't nostalgia, it was insurance. Researchers still argue over numbers. How many households relied on raw hides versus tanned? How often people slept literally inside the skins versus atop them? But here, curled in the last cabin of the night, the debate feels distant and pointless. The proof is the heat that is already gathering under your collar, the way your heartbeat slows to match the slow pulse of the nest itself. You lie still long enough for the difference between freezing and surviving to become a memory rather than a threat. Long enough for the bear's fur to warm against your cheek like the flank of a sleeping friend. Then, gently, you climb out. The hides settle back into their waiting shape, patient, ready for the next body the storm tries to claim. You stand at the door, pull the bear robe one last time across your shoulders like a cape, and breathe in the wild scent that says, "We took, and we gave back, and we lived." Outside, the wind has finally begun to tire. The snow falls straight now, soft and deliberate, as though the storm itself is laying a quilt over the world. You step into it without fear. Behind you, every cabin you visited tonight, the half-built shells, the animal-shared rooms, the ember bowls, the stone-warmed beds, the burrows of quilt and robe, stands quiet, holding its small hoard of borrowed warmth exactly as you left it, waiting for morning or for the next traveler who needs to remember how it was done. You carry all of them with you now, the weight of wool and stone and hide and steam and breath. One long, unbroken chain of heat passed hand to hand across 100 merciless winters. The sky is the color of weak coffee in the east. Dawn is coming, slow but certain. And for the first time all night, you are not walking toward warmth. You are walking with it. You let yourself sink all the way down. The hides open just enough to receive you, then close again, like a slow, deliberate mouth. The bear fur settles across your chest with the weight of deep water. The fox pelt you pulled over your shoulders tucks itself along your neck as though it remembers the shape of a throat. Deer hide cushions your hips. Rabbit lines the hollow beneath your knees. Every breath you take comes back warmer, richer, tasting faintly of smoke and pine and something wild that has never known a stove. The sound changes first. The storm is still there. You can feel it in the faint tremor of the logs, but the thick pelts swallow its voice until the wind is only a dull heartbeat against the outside wall. Even the creak of the cabin softens, muffled by layers of hair and fat and memory. A child once said it felt like sleeping inside a wolf's dream. You understand now why some old trappers and Matisse hunters refused feather beds even after they could afford them. Wool is patient, but fur is alive. It moves with you when you shift. It breathes when you breathe. Gives back the heat your body makes instead of letting it leak away into the floor. There is no cold spot, no draft sneaking up your spine. Only the steady, animal certainty that you are, for this one night, the safest thing in the woods.
You pull the edge of the great bear hide higher. Its weight pins your shoulder, and the sensation is not frightening. It is protective, the way deep snow protects the roots sleeping beneath it. Your pulse slows. Your thoughts loosen. You can almost feel the hundreds of nights this nest has already held. The hunter coming in at dawn with frost in his beard. The mother nursing an infant under the fox pelt so the child's breath stayed warm against her skin. The teenagers arguing in whispers over who got the prime spot against the bear's thick ruff until exhaustion won and they curled together like pups. Somewhere above you, snow keeps falling. Somewhere inside you, the last of the fear thaws and runs off like meltwater. This is the final lesson the frontier winter saved for the end. When everything else was stripped away, the half-built cabins, the failing fires, the last scraps of cloth, people still had the animals they had taken. And those animals, even in death, refused to let them freeze.
Skin to skin, breath to breath, the debt was paid in warmth. You lie still long enough for the nest to remember your shape, long enough for the difference between living and dying to become a quiet, ridiculous thing. Then, gently, reluctantly, you climb out. The hides sigh, close the space you leave, and wait for the next body the storm sends. You stand at the door, pull the fox pelt around your shoulders one last time like a mantle, and step back into the night. The wind has finally spent itself. Snow falls straight and soft now, each flake deliberate, almost tender. The eastern sky has gone from iron to pearl. You do not hurry. There is no need. Every cabin you pass tonight is still there behind you, holding its small hoard of heat exactly as you left it. The ember bowl blowing, the river stones breathing, the quilts burrowed, the kettle dreaming of steam, the animals and the robes and the shared breath, all waiting for morning or for the next wary traveler. And you walk through the softening storm, carrying all of them inside your chest, warm enough, finally, forever.
You stand in the middle of the raw, half-finished room and feel the wind move through it like a restless animal that has already decided the house belongs to it. This is the cabin they never quite conquered. The logs are thick cottonwood and bur oak, cut green and stacked before they had time to season. Between them, the gaps yawn, some no wider than a knife blade, others big enough to admit a clenched fist. Snow sifts through the larger ones in thin, constant curtains, forming delicate ridges on the frozen dirt floor. Every breath you take shows white and is snatched away before it can rise. You crouch again and run a bare finger along one of the cracked daub patches. It crumbles at the touch, dry as old bread. The mixture is mostly clay with a handful of dead grass and, yes, a gray streak of wood ash. Someone stood right here, palms black with mud, pressing it into the wall while their breath froze on their beard or eyelashes, whispering the half-prayer, half-curse that every frontier builder knew. Hold, damn you, just hold till spring. They called it daubing, or chinking in anger, when it was done in a hurry against an oncoming storm. Proper chinking, thin oak splits of wood wedged tight and sealed with lime mortar, was for next year, or the year after that, or the year the crop didn't fail and the baby didn't die and there was finally time. In the meantime, they used what the moment allowed. Riverbank clay, prairie sod, buffalo dung mixed with hair and all, anything that would stick for a week or a night. You find a bucket again, its inside rim still flaked with the ghost of last week's mud. Beside it lies a broken wooden spoon and a scrap of burlap once used as a trowel. The picture forms itself. A woman on her knees at dusk, children feeding her handfuls of straw while the father held a lantern made from a punctured tin can. All of them racing the temperature drop, stuffing cracks the way sailors stuff leaks in a sinking boat.
Through the widest gap you can see the storm still raging, but inside the wind sings a different notes. High, reedy whines through the small cracks, low moans through the big ones. A constant, restless conversation between the house and the night trying to own it. One traveler wrote that sleeping in such a cabin felt like trying to rest inside a flute. Yet even here they fought back. You notice it in the careful way the daub is thicker near the floor, where the coldest air always pools, and in the single strip of rawhide someone nailed over the worst gap like a desperate bandage. You see it in the pile of rags and old shirts waiting in the corner, ready to be twisted and jammed into any new hole the wind opens before morning. You walk the room slowly, trailing your hand along the walls. Every log is scarred with knife marks where someone trimmed a high spot so the next course would sit tighter. Every gap tells the same unfinished story. We got this far, winter came, we are still trying.
A small, stubborn detail surfaces from an 1830s Illinois Land Office report. Surveyors often found cabins where the daubing had been done in layers of different colors: spring's red clay, summer's gray, autumn's yellow, like rings in a tree, each band marking another storm survived. You stop at the place where the wind is loudest. Press your palm to a crack no amount of mud ever quite closed, and feel the cold pour over your skin like water. For the first time tonight, you understand the special terror of this kind of shelter. Not that it is cold, but that it is almost a house, close enough to promise safety, unfinished enough to betray you at every gust. Yet someone slept here. The straw in the corner is pressed flat in the shape of bodies that curled together for warmth. A single square of canvas has been tacked over the worst wall as a windbreak, its edges stiff with frost. They kept trying, night after night, patch after patch, the way a person keeps breathing even when the air is mostly ice.
You step back outside. The door refuses to latch properly. The wind has warped the frame. You leave it the way you found it, ajar just enough for the next desperate traveler to push through without knocking. The storm has begun to quiet, but it still has teeth. Snow still falls, thick and deliberate. Yet something in you has changed. You have seen the whole arc now, from half-built walls that let winter walk right in, to animal heat, river stones, embers, quilts, hides, cups of hot water, and, at the very last, raw hides that turned the tables and made winter serve. Every trick, every scrap, every borrowed heartbeat added up to the same quiet refusal. Not tonight, not us. You pull the fox pelt tighter around your shoulders. It is yours now, a gift from every cabin you leave behind, and start the long walk toward morning. The snow accepts your weight more gently, the wind almost polite. Behind you, the unfinished cabin stands open to the night, still breathing clay and grass and stubborn hope into the cold.
Ahead, the sky is growing pale rose at the edges. You keep walking, warm enough at last, carrying the entire frontier winter folded inside your chest like a bear robe that will never let the cold find you again. You do not look back again. The drafty cabin is already folding itself into the long chain of shelters you now carry inside you. The unfinished walls, the frozen mud, the grass waiting in patient handfuls. the family that slept in the middle of their own house because the edges belong to winter. The wind has turned playful rather than murderous. It shoves you sideways, then catches you, as if testing whether you have truly learned what it taught. Snow no longer stings. It settles on your shoulders like a blessing you finally earned. Ahead, the storm has begun to thin. The clouds part just enough to let a wash of pale rose spill across the snow. The world is turning the color of weak tea steeped too long. The first honest hint that night is ending. You crest a low rise and stop.
Below you, scattered across the wide clearing like dark seeds on white cloth, stand every cabin you have visited tonight. The half-built shell, the animal-warmed room, the stone hearth and ember bowl, the clothing nest, the quilt burrow, the river stone bed, the kettle still dreaming of steam, the nest of hides, the raw, daubed walls that refuse to fall. They are all here in one place, as though the storm gathered them together so you could see the entire story at once. And between them, almost lost in the drifts, a final cabin waits. Smaller than the rest, newer, its logs tight and true, its roof steep and shingled, a thin ribbon of smoke rising straight and steady from a stone chimney that will never ice shut. You know what it means before you reach it. You push the door open. Inside, the air is warm, honest, golden, living warmth. A small fire crackles in a proper hearth of riverstone. A kettle hums. A quilt, thick but neatly folded, lies across a real bedstead raised off the floor.
On the table sits a loaf of bread still cooling, and beside it a crock of butter beginning to soften. This is the cabin they built when spring finally came, when the crop paid, when the baby lived, when there was time at last to finish what the winter had interrupted. You step inside and close the door. The latch clicks like a promise capped. The storm, suddenly gentle, lays its last flakes against the window, and then, almost shyly, begins to leave. You pull off your gloves, cross the room, and lay your hand on the warm chimney stones. They give back heat the way a friend gives back a borrowed coat, gladly, without question. Outside, the sky widens to pale gold. You have walked the entire frontier winter in a single night, from the first desperate daub of mud to the final true hearth. And now you know the whole quiet, fierce, unbroken truth. They were cold. They were afraid. They were never, not once, defeated. You leave the door unlatched, the fire banked low, the quilt turned down. Morning has arrived. And somewhere out there, the next traveler, weary, half frozen, certain the night will win, will see the ribbon of smoke rising straight and sure against the newborn sky and understand, before they even reach the step, that someone who came before them refused to let the winter have the last word. You walk out into the soft, settling snow, lighter than you have ever been, carrying every borrowed heartbeat of every cabin inside you like a lantern that will never go out. The storm is over. The story is finished. And they were warm enough. You sit on the snow shelf and the cave receives you the way deep water receives a stone, without sound, without hurry. The silence is so complete that your own pulse becomes loud. The storm, which only moments ago wanted to tear the world apart, now presses against the curved walls in long, slow breaths. In, out, exactly the rhythm a sleeping bear might make.
You understand instantly why children believed they heard winter's heartbeat. It is not imagination, it is physics wearing the clothes of a lullaby.
You pull the stiff hide across your lap. Beneath it, the packed snow is hard as planed wood. Yet the hide and the thin layer of straw keep the cold from biting through. The temperature in here hovers just below freezing, cold enough to kill in hours if you were naked, warm enough to grant another dawn if you were clothed and still. 10 degrees, maybe 12, saved by nothing more than the storm's own body turned against itself. Snow is the perfect traitor. It tries to bury you, and if you shape it right, it becomes the only roof that never leaks wind. You lie back on the narrow shelf. The ceiling curves close above your face, smooth and pale as the inside of a seashell. Your breath rises, brushes the snow, and falls back as the tiniest shower of crystals that glitter once in the half-light before vanishing. The lantern, had it been lit, would have painted the walls soft gold. Instead, the cave glows with its own faint inner light, the color of moon on bone.
You understand now why some travelers, caught far from any cabin, chose to dig in rather than keep walking. A man can lose his way in a whiteout and die in minutes. The same man can carve a room from the storm's own flesh and wake up alive, astonished, wrapped in the very thing that was meant to kill him. Indigenous nations across the north had known this for centuries. The Sami with their goatee, the Inuit with quinsea and igluvigak, the Cree and Ojibwe teaching startled newcomers how to sleep inside the snow instead of fighting it. Settlers learned fast when the alternative was a grave under a drift. You close your eyes. The cave breathes around you. In, out. In, out. 1,000 miles of winter reduced to the slow tide of frozen air against packed snow. You think of the family that crawled in here however many nights or years ago. Father first to test the ceiling, mother handing children through the low tunnel one by one. The smallest passed like a bundle of laundry, everyone laughing or crying from relief when they realized the wind could not follow. They would have curled together on this very shelf, knees to chest, backs against the curved wall, sharing one hide in the small furnace of their bodies, until morning found the entrance again. You stay long enough for the cave to memorize the shape of your warmth, long enough for the difference between death and shelter to become only a few shovelfuls of snow. Then you sit up, brush crystals from your sleeves, and crawl back through the short tunnel. The storm has all but stopped. Snow still falls, but gently now, like someone laying a final quilt over the world. The sky has gone from pearl to the thinnest wash of rose gold. You stand in the open air and look back once. The entrance is already softening, edges rounding, ready to vanish by noon and leave no trace that anyone was ever saved here. You do not mark the spot. Some shelters are meant to disappear the way dreams do when morning comes. You turn eastward, toward the light that is finally, undeniably winning, and walk. Behind you, the long chain of cabins, mud-daubed walls, animal breath, river stones, quilts, hides, embers, hot water, and now the storm's own white heart turned inside out, settles into silence, every one of them having done its job. You carry them all, and you are warm enough. The night is finished. The winter has told its last story. And the story ends, as all the best ones do, with someone stepping out of the snow into the first gentle light of morning, astonished to still be alive,
astonished to discover that the coldest night on Earth was never cold enough to put out the small, stubborn fire a human being keeps burning in the center of their chest. You walk on. The sun is coming, and you are carrying it with you. You stand in the middle of the room and feel the cabin breathing around you, slow, collective, alive. This is the final, widest circle, the one place where winter itself was forced to admit defeat.
The pallets are pushed together into one long island of humanity. Quilts overlapping quilts, coats laid atop blankets. A child's mitten still tucked under a corner, as if its owner only stepped away for a moment. Every bed belongs to everyone and no one. You can almost see the order they must have kept. Strongest adults on the cold outer edges, elders next, then mothers with babies against their chests, smallest children in the very center like the yolk of an egg no frost could ever reach. Someone's pipe lies cold on the windowsill. Someone else's Bible, open to Psalms, marks a place with a scrap of calico. A single sock dangles from a nail, too small for any adult here, left to dry over the shared heat of 20 bodies. The room smells of wool, wood smoke, coffee long gone cold, and the unmistakable animal warmth of people who decided that surviving alone was no longer an option. You kneel and lay your palm on the whitest pallet.
The blankets are still astonishingly warm, as though the storm has been raging for days, but the people only just rose and stepped outside to check the sky. You understand now, this is where the entire scattered settlement came when the temperature dropped so low that individual cabins became tombs. They walked miles through the blizzard, following a rope strung from house to house, carrying children and whatever food could be spared, because one large group breathing together could raise the temperature of a room by 15, 20, even 25 degrees, enough to keep toes from blackening, enough to keep hope from freezing solid. An old Dakota Territory census note surfaces. In the winter of 1880-81, a single 20 by 24 cabin outside Yankston sheltered 43 souls for 9 straight days. They slept in shifts, 4 hours on the floor, 4 hours sitting against the wall, passing babies hand to hand like precious loaves, so no one ever lost contact with another living body.
When the storm finally broke, only one elder had died, quietly, in his sleep, held between his daughter and grandson, and the rest walked out laughing, astonished, reborn. You walk the edges of the room and count the signs. 11 tin cups lined up on a bench, 3 lanterns sharing one puddle of oil, a single cradle board propped in the corner with a rag doll still tucked inside. There is no space here for ownership, only for presence. You lie down for a moment on the great communal pallet, just long enough to feel the lingering heat of dozens of hearts rise up through the layers and settle against your own chest. The sensation is so gentle, so undeniably alive, that tears threaten without warning. This is what the frontier winter tried hardest to kill and never once succeeded at. The simple, stubborn decision that no one would freeze while someone else still had breath to give. You rise, smooth the quilts you disturbed, and walk to the door.
Outside, the sky has gone from rose to clear, impossible gold. The storm has spent itself entirely. Only a few lazy flakes drift down like afterthoughts. You step onto the threshold and look back once. The cabin glows faintly in the new light, a low arc riding the white sea of the prairie, full of people who are no longer here, and yet somehow still are. You leave the door unlatched. Somewhere out there, the next storm is already gathering itself far to the northwest. When it comes, someone will see the smoke or remember the rope line or simply know the way every living thing knows where warmth is when the world turns lethal. You pull the fox pelt close, take one final breath of the shared air, and walk out into the morning. The winter has told every story it had, and every story ended the same way. They opened the door. They made room. They were warm enough. The sun rises full and fierce over the snow. You carry it and all of them with you into the new day.
You push the crooked door with 2 fingers, and it swings inward on a single leather hinge, sighing like something tired of pretending. Inside, the air is wrong. Not cold in the way of the other cabins, not the sharp, honest bite of a storm kept at bay, but dead. A stillness so complete it feels like the room has been holding its breath for years. A thin skin of frost coats everything: the table, the single chair lying on its side, the quilt frozen stiff across the narrow bunk, as though someone stood up in the middle of the night and simply never came back. Snow has sifted through the gaps around the chimney and lies in perfect, undisturbed ridges across the floorboards. In one corner, a cradle board leans against the wall, its rawhide lacing brittle and white with rime. You step carefully. The frost crackles under your boots like thin ice on a pond. This is the cabin that lost.
You feel it before you see the details. The kettle tipped on its side, a single tin cup overturned beside it. The small pile of kindlings still stacked neatly by a hearth that never held fire that night. The daubing between the logs is only half finished. Handprints, visible in the frozen mud, where someone tried one last time to keep the wind out. On the bunk, the quilt is pulled back just enough to show the shape of 2 bodies beneath. Small, curled together. A mother's arm still curved protectively around a child. The frost has preserved them in perfect silence. Eyelashes white, lips pale, faces turned toward each other as though sharing a final warmth that never quite arrived. You do not need to lift the quilt. You already know. Outside, the storm kept its promise after all. You stand in the middle of the room and let the silence settle over you like another layer of snow. There is no lingering heat here, no ember, no river stone, no shared breath to borrow. Only the soft, relentless proof that sometimes the winter won. And yet, even here, there is something else. On the table, half covered by frost, lies a small wooden top, the kind a child spins on a string. Someone carved it from a cottonwood branch and painted it with 3 uneven red stripes. It sits upright, perfectly balanced, as though the last motion in this cabin was laughter. You pick it up. It is lighter than memory, heavier than grief. You slip it into your pocket. Then you pull the quilt gently back into place, smoothing the frozen folds so the 2 small shapes beneath look only as though they are sleeping. You set the chair upright. You close the door behind you, softly, the way you would leave any room where someone has just drifted off. Outside, the storm is almost ended. The sky is the color of weak coffee with milk, and the snow falls in slow, deliberate flakes. You walk away without looking back. You carry every cabin now, the ones that held, the ones that barely held, and the one that did not. The chain is complete. Morning is here, pale and honest and wide. And somewhere inside your coat, against your heart, the small wooden top waits, 3 crooked red stripes bright as fresh blood, for the next child who will need to remember that even on the worst night the frontier ever knew, someone still took the time to carve a toy. You keep walking. The sun lifts itself over the edge of the world, slow and certain, and the long winter finally, truly ends. You stand in the middle of the children's kingdom and feel the room grow smaller around you, the way a story does when it is told by someone very young and very brave. These are not beds. They're forts. They're dens. They're the secret architecture of childhood refusing to surrender. You crawl into the largest one, the deliberate one built with help from older hands, and pull the hide flap closed behind you. Inside, the world shrinks to the size of a heartbeat. The branches arch overhead like the ribs of some friendly animal. The straw smells of summer meadows no one has seen for months.
A single red yarn thread, probably stolen from a mother's mending basket, has been tied around a twig for luck. Someone pressed a dried clover flower into a crack where the hides meet. Its ghost is still there, flattened and pale. You lie down. The space is exactly child-sized. Your knees touch one wall, your hair brushes the other. Instantly, the cold retreats. Not far, it is still winter, but far enough. The nest does what every good story does. It makes the storm smaller than the teller. You understand now why parents let the floors stay cluttered with straw and crates and half-torn quilts. In a world where adults could only patch and pray and wait, children were allowed to build. Every nest is a declaration. We are still here. We are still making. A memory surfaces, gentle and precise, from an 1872 letter a Minnesota schoolteacher saved. The little ones have made burrows like mice. I scold them for the mess, and then lie awake, thanking God they still know how to play. While they have strength to drag a crate across the floor and call it a castle, the winter has not won.
You reach out and touch the red yarn. It is frayed, but it holds. Outside, the storm keeps its appointment with the grown-up world. In here, a circle of twigs and rags keeps a different appointment, with tomorrow, with spring, with every story that begins once when the snow was higher than the roof. You crawl out slowly, careful not to disturb the shape of any nest. You leave each flap exactly as you found it, each lucky yarn, each pressed flower, each brave small world intact. At the door you pause and look back. The room is a village of tiny, stubborn shelters, each one a heartbeat, saying the same thing in 100 quiet voices. We were cold. We were afraid. But we built this anyway. You step outside. The storm is almost over now. The snow falls straight and soft, like someone laying the last careful quilt over the world before morning. You carry the children's nests with you too, folded small, tucked inside the same pocket where the wooden top waits, red stripes and red yarn side by side.
The sun is coming, and every child who ever curled inside a circle of rags and straw and called it home is walking out into it with you, laughing, astonished, warm enough. The winter has told its final story, and the children, always, always the children,
get the last word. We made it. We built it. We are still here. You sit very still on the edge of the frozen pallet and let the room speak its small, glittering truth. This is the cabin where winter crept inside and stayed. Every breath taken here last night is still visible. Delicate fern patterns of frost on the underside of the top blanket. Tiny icicles no longer than an eyelash hanging from the rafters where the warmest air rose and died. A perfect circle of clearer ice on the wall where someone's head rested all night, giving off just enough heat to keep the logs from frosting entirely. You lift the corner of the blanket again. It crackles like stiff paper. Beneath it, the straw is white, each blade sheathed in a paper-thin tube of ice. When you press your palm down, the crust collapses with a sound like stepping on the thinnest pond ice in early winter. Cold rushes up your wrist so fast, it feels like a burn. You have seen every other defense tonight. Animal heat, river stones, shared breath, snow caves, children's nests of straw and hope. But here, the cold walked straight through the walls, slipped under the blankets, and wrote its name in frost across everything human. And yet, on the floor beside the pallet lies a single mitten, child-sized, the thumb worn through. Someone woke in the night, felt the frost settling, and tucked that mitten under the blanket's edge so at least one small hand would meet something soft instead of ice in the morning. You pick it up. Inside, the wool is still faintly warmer than the air, as though the child's dream refused to leave entirely.
You have read the letters. Eyelashes frozen shut, beards stiff as boards, blankets that had to be peeled from the straw like bark from a tree. Mothers who laughed about shaking out the inside snow so the children would think it magic instead of warning. Here is the place those stories came from. You stand, shake the mitten once so the frost falls from it in a tiny glittering cloud, and tuck it carefully into your pocket beside the wooden top and the scrap of red yarn. Then you do what every person who ever woke in this cabin had to do. You fold the top blanket back exactly as you found it, smoothing the frost so it looks only like sleep, not surrender. You leave the door ajar the same width it was when you arrived. Some mornings are too heavy to latch shut. Outside, the storm has finally laid itself down. The snow falls in single, slow flakes now, each one perfect and unhurried. The sky is the color of the inside of a seashell. You walk away carrying the coldest room of the night along with all the others. They balance. The frost and the fire.
The empty cradle board and the children's laughter. The cabin that lost and the 43 souls who lived 9 days in one room because they refused to lose. You carry them all, perfectly balanced, perfectly warm. The sun breaks free over the horizon, sudden and blinding, turning every flake in the air to a spark of living fire. Morning has come, and every breath that froze last night is rising now, invisible and warm, into a sky that has finally remembered how to be kind. You keep walking, pockets full of small bright things, red stripes, red yarn, one worn mitten, heart full of every way a human being can refuse to let the winter win. The frontier night is finished, and you,
like every child who ever shook frost from a blanket and laughed at the indoor snowstorm, are still here. Warm enough. Always warm enough. You know what this is before your mind supplies the name. A Swedish torch. A frontier lifeboat. A single log made into the last possible fire.
The log is thick, cut from a straight-grained cottonwood or birch, maybe 3 feet long. A deep X has been chainsawed or axe cut from one end almost to the other, splitting the heart into 4 upright quarters that can stand like a crude chimney. Someone shaved the bark smooth, drilled a small air hole near the base, and rubbed the inside with fat or pitch so it would catch quickly, even when the world outside was soaked or frozen. You have read the stories. Travelers benighted miles from any cabin. Surveyors, trappers, families fleeing a grass fire or a flooded river. All of them taught the same desperate trick. 1 dry log, 1 hatchet, 1 match or flint strike, and you could have fire and warmth enough to keep 2 or 3 people alive until morning. You lift the log. It is surprisingly light. The heartwood burned or rotted away long ago, leaving only the shell. Inside, black charcoal still clings in soft flakes. Someone sat right here, knees drawn up, feeding the upright quarters with twigs and shavings, nursing the flame that lived in the very center of the wood so the wind could not reach it.
The smoke rose straight up the natural chimney and out a small vent someone poked through the roof. The heat, trapped inside the hollow, radiated outward like a stove made of a single piece of tree. You set it down gently and noticed the bundle of cloth beside it. An old coat, stiff with cold, rolled tight and tied with a strip of rawhide. Inside are a handful of birch bark curls, a twist of fat pine, and a square of charred linen, the last ember carrier someone hoped would still hold a coal when they reached the next shelter. Everything in this tiny room is designed for one purpose: keep the spark alive long enough to become morning. You crawl to the back wall and find the sleeping place. Nothing more than a slight depression in the frozen dirt floor, lined with a single scrap of canvas and the same coat that once wrapped the fire-starting bundle. 2 people could lie here, back to back, the hollow log between their boots, its slow, steady heat rising along their legs all night.
One person could sit upright, knees to chest, feeding the fire quarter by quarter, dozing in snatches while the log burned from the inside out. A memory from an 1840s overland diary surfaces, sharp and clear. We came to the traveler's hut at dusk. 1 log stood on end in the middle of the floor, burning like a candle in a church. My wife and the baby slept curled around it while I kept watch. When the last quarter fell into ash, the sun was up, and we were still breathing. You touch the rim of the hollow log again. The faint warmth you felt earlier is only memory now, but it is enough. This is the smallest shelter you have entered tonight, and somehow the fiercest. No quilts, no shared breath of dozens, no snow cave, no nest of hides. Only 1 log, 1 match, 1 stubborn refusal to lie down and die between here and wherever tomorrow was. You stand, brush the charcoal dust from your gloves, and roll the old coat exactly as you found it, the charred linen still inside, waiting for the next pair of half-frozen hands. At the door, you pause and look back. The hollow log stands upright in the dimness, like a dark candle that has already done its miracle and is ready to do it again. You leave the door unlatched. Outside, the storm has gentled to a whisper. The clouds are thinning. A cold,
perfect star hangs low in the east, bright enough to cast shadows on the snow. You step into the stillness, carrying the log's small, fierce lesson along with every other. Sometimes warmth is 43 bodies in one room. Sometimes it is a circle of children and straw. Sometimes it is a single hollow log burning from the inside out, while two travelers take turns keeping watch over tomorrow. You walk on. The night is almost over, and you have everything you came for. You are warm enough, more than enough. You stand in the traveler's last outpost and feel the room shrink to the size of a single heartbeat.
Everything here is made to be carried on a back, pulled by a dog, or dragged behind a half-starved horse. The hollow log, no longer than a man, the overturned sled, light enough for one person to flip, the bedroll, tight as a soldier's blanket, the iron pot, small enough to hang from a belt. Nothing is permanent. Everything is promised. You kneel again beside the sled and run your gloved hand along the straw-packed hollow beneath. It is exactly the length of a grown body curled tight. The runners arch overhead like the ribs of a whale. Someone once lay here while the storm screamed across the open prairie and the snow drifted over the edges until the world went quiet, and the only sound was breath fogging in the dark. You unroll the bedroll fully now. It opens with a soft sigh, wolf fur, a patched quilt, a spare shirt, a square of canvas once a wagon cover, lashed together with rawhide so nothing is ever lost.
You press your face into the center. It smells of smoke, pine pitch, and the faint iron of old blood, where someone stitched a tear with sinew. This is the entire house of a person who owns nothing but distance. A memory rises unbidden from an 1846 Mormon handcart company journal. When the blizzard caught us on the Sweetwater, we turned the handcart on its side, crawled beneath with the children, and pulled the canvas over us like a coffin lid. We sang hymns until the snow sealed us in. In the morning, the oxen were dead, but every child opened its eyes. You roll the bundle again, tighter than you found it, and tie the rawhide knot exactly as it was. Then you lift the hollow log one last time and slide your arm all the way inside. The space is barely wider than your shoulders. A tall man would have to lie diagonally, knees drawn up, coat pulled over his head. But once the ends were stopped with a pack or a hat, once the traveler's own breath began to collect, the log became a wooden lung. Inhale cold, exhale warm, repeat until morning. Some called them widowmakers when they rolled downhill in the night. Most simply called them home. You set the log upright again, the way every traveler leaves it, ready for the next person who stumbles in with ice in their beard and no promise of another shelter for 50 miles. At the door, you pause. The storm has finally lain down. Snow falls in single, perfect flakes that melt the instant they touch your cheek. Somewhere far above the clouds, the sky is already the color of new cream. You step outside. Behind you, the tiny cabin stands no higher than your waist, half buried, a dark seed in the white field. It will be gone by spring, rotted or burned for firewood by the next person desperate enough to need what it carries. You walk away, carrying its entire inventory in your chest. The hollow log, the overturned sled, the bedroll that can become a house, the iron pot with its last inch of ice waiting to be melted into tomorrow.
You have everything now. Every possible way a human being can refuse to die between one sunset and the next is folded inside you, light as a promise, heavy as life.
The sun lifts itself over the edge of the world, sudden and blinding. You do not look back. There is nothing left to learn. You are warm enough. You always were. You do not walk quickly now. There is no need. The sun has cleared the horizon entirely, and the world has turned into something almost unbearably beautiful. Every drift a slow wave of rose gold fire. Every breath you exhale, a small white prayer that lingers, sparkles, and then rises to meet the light. The sky is the color of fresh cream poured over fire, and the silence is so complete you can hear the snow itself softening, grain by grain, under the first tender touch of warmth. You pause on the last low rise and look back. The long chain of cabins is still there, half buried and dreaming, stretching behind you like beads on a rosary of survival.
From this distance, they look small, almost fragile. Yet each one glows faintly, as if a tiny ember still burns inside every wall, every quilt, every hollow log. You can almost see them breathing in unison, slow and steady, the way the community cabin breathed when 43 people chose life over freezing. You lift your hand in a quiet salute no one will ever see. "Thank you," you whisper to the wind that is no longer trying to kill you. "Thank you for every borrowed heartbeat I was allowed to carry." Then you turn forward again. Ahead, the snowfield stretches wide and shining, and at its far edge you can just make out the faint, dark line of the first green-black pines that survived the winter. Beyond them, somewhere past seeing, there will be smoke rising straight and blue from chimneys that no longer fear the wind. Coffee boiling. Children running barefoot because boots feel suddenly unnecessary. Dogs barking at the sheer astonishment of sun on fur. But you are in no rush to reach it. You take one deliberate step, then another, letting the snow cradle your boots the way the children's straw nests once cradled small dreaming bodies. Each footprint you leave fills slowly with liquid gold as the sun climbs. By noon, they will be gone, and that is exactly as it should be. Some journeys are meant to melt into memory the moment morning truly arrives. You pull the fox pelt from your shoulders and fold it gently. You take the wooden top, the scrap of red yarn, and the worn mitten from your pocket and lay them in a small cairn on the snow. 3 bright things left for the spring thaw to find. For the next child who will never know how cold a night can truly get, yet will somehow understand the gifts anyway. You keep only one thing: the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke and warm stew and human breath that has settled into the weave of your own coat. That will never leave you. It is your quiet proof. The sun climbs higher. The snow begins to sing its soft, wet song of surrender. And you walk on, alone now in the way only someone who has been carried by hundreds of hearts can ever truly be alone. Not empty but full, not weary but awake, not cold but burning gently from the inside out with every small fire you were entrusted to carry through the dark. Somewhere behind you, a raven calls once, clear, unafraid, the first real sound of the new season. Somewhere ahead, a thin curl of smoke rises straight into the sky from a cabin you have never seen, inviting you forward with the promise of coffee and rest and stories told in daylight. You smile, small and tired and impossibly wide, and you keep walking. The frontier winter is finished. It kept every promise it ever made, to test you, to break you, to remake you. And you kept the only promise that mattered. You stayed warm enough. You always stayed warm enough. The snow glitters one last time, a million tiny mirrors flashing farewell, and then it begins, very gently, to let you go. Fade to birdsong. Fade to distant laughter carried on warming wind. Fade to the soft, steady heartbeat of a world remembering how to be kind again. Good morning, traveler. Welcome home. You made it. We all did.